Yesterday I made a video about the practice of telling a streamer GG in chat after a match you played with them that they lost. If you want to see it for the full context, there's a link that should be showing up in the upper right if I remember to put it there, but in short, I explained that while saying GG is typically polite and can be positive, as I've made a video about, in this context, it's often used as a subtle brag that you won over the streamer. And the volume with which known players and streamers will get those kinds of messages makes it so that even a well-meaning instance of it can sometimes come at the wrong time and trigger some negative emotions. Hitzel was the one to bring the subject up in a tweet. I expressed my feelings about the subject in my video, and there were a bunch of other streamers retweeting or agreeing with Hitzel, like Becca, Rachelski, and Chase247. It was meant to be a moment where streamers communicated publicly what the best way would be to treat them so that people in their stream chats can build better relationships with them. That's the way a lot of people took it. But there were some other comments that I found troubling. Some people actually doubled down, saying that, I'm going to keep doing it because it's good manners. You can't just let a few bad apples turn GG from being good manners to being bad manners. Grow thicker skin. The situation in question, saying GG in Twitch chat, is of very minor importance. I never expected that making a video about it would completely solve the problem, and that's fine. What's more important to me here is that I believe this kind of comment demonstrates a particular failure of empathy. And empathy is important for a lot more reasons than just this small way to protect my feelings after I lose a game of Splatoon. So here we go. Let's talk about manners for a minute. Expectations that people have of each other's behavior. Manners serve a function, and that function is to set boundaries that people will be comfortable in. Manners exist so people don't have to endure each other, but can instead enjoy each other's company. Sure, if someone's talking with their mouth full of food, I'll live, but I'd rather not have to put up with that, because it's kinda gross. If someone chooses not to do that, they're making being with them around a dinner table more comfortable, more enjoyable, and that's the goal, for us to enjoy our time together. So sticking to the rules that people call good manners will often help you get along with people better. That said, our idea of good manners is something that comes from our specific culture. What's considered polite in one place isn't what has come to be considered polite in all places. Where a lot of people get manners wrong is that they fail to recognize that their understanding of manners isn't universal, that maybe someone else can have been raised in a respectful, comfortable household that nevertheless had different rules. You can't expect everyone to adhere to good manners unless everyone knows which manners you think are good. Also, if some people want different treatment than others, giving them that treatment they want is more important than what an old-fashioned rulebook says. The rulebook's whole purpose is to make people comfortable, and it should be disregarded as soon as it's not doing that. Context matters. The rulebook doesn't work by telling someone, this needs to be the thing that makes you comfortable, but by telling the reader, this is what you can do to make most other people comfortable. Not everyone was raised to know what order the silverware should be laid out around the plate, or who should sit at the head or foot of the table, or not to put your elbows on the table while you're eating. There's an argument that putting your elbows on the table isn't even a problem anymore. Do you know why you're not supposed to put your elbows on the table? One possible reason is that tabletops used to be designed in such a way that putting your weight on the tabletop could cause it to collapse and spill everything. Another that's been suggested is that it suggested a lack of restraint because people were worried about brawling, and it was a way to show that you were going to stay in your space and not invade someone else's while you happened to have a steak knife in your hand. Those aren't things we worry about anymore. At least, I hope not. If your rule not to put elbows on the table rises out of having a small table, that putting your elbows on it takes space away from the person sitting next to you, that makes sense. If you have kids that are going to accidentally put their elbows down in someone's food, that's a great reason for the rule. But if you're having dinner with plenty of space with adults, is there really much of a reason why this needs to be regarded as bad manners anymore? Ask a manners expert, consult a text on manners, And all the time you'll find them saying something to the effect that what's most important isn't etiquette for etiquette's sake, but making people comfortable. So if you have to go off script to make people comfortable, you go off script. That's good manners. Manners aren't worth following if they're not serving their purpose, if someone's only adhering to the letter of the law and not the spirit of it. In the same way that something off script can be polite, something that's considered good manners can also sometimes be impolite. The English of the American South includes the phrase, "bless your heart," which on its face is an expression of very positive regard. But because of the culture of politeness, oftentimes a Southerner finds themselves in a position where they don't feel free to express that the person they're addressing is making a fool of themselves, and so they say, "bless your heart," instead of what they're actually thinking. As time has gone on, the phrase has been recognized as having the possibility of being entirely positive, but also having the possibility of being a passive-aggressive condemnation. Depending on tone and context, it's entirely reasonable sometimes to get upset at someone for saying "bless your heart." You can't necessarily expect someone to take what are kind words the right way if you're using them in the wrong context or with the wrong tone. So let's consider this particular context. Recall that, for a lot of content creators, the relationship you have with them is parasocial, that is, not fully reciprocated. You know more about them than they know about you, because the relationship is uneven. You see their faces, know their names, hear their voices for hours at a time, and they only see a line of text tied to your pseudonym every now and then in a scrolling chat window. It's easy to forget that they don't have the same familiarity with you that you have with them. For you, like we talked about in the previous video, this may be a really cool moment where you played a game against someone who's well known, but for them it's just another solo queue match. Do you seek out and say GG to every random player you play a solo queue match with? No. You're seeking this individual out because you recognize them, you know something about them, they feel familiar. When people have a typical number of friends they know who play the game, it's a pretty uncommon occurrence, worthy of comment, to run into them randomly in solo queue. That's a special occasion. But for a content creator whose in-game friend request inbox is so full they don't even bother deleting the extra requests anymore, people recognizing them is way, way more common, to the point that it doesn't feel worthy of comment to the content creator, especially if the person reaching out isn't well known to them. When I talked about the phrase GG and what it means in my older video, I talked about how it validates the game. How, for you, the player who participated, it says either that, while you lost, you did try your best and that their win is valid, or that you recognize the efforts the other player made and respect them as a competitor for making them, even though they lost to you. Both of those are really positive ways to train yourself to think. But the general positivity of the phrase GG can be used to mask that a player is just proud they beat you and wants everyone else to know it happened. Knowing what someone means when they say it isn't so simple when you're a content creator with an audience who can pretty anonymously access you. You can't read their tone from the text by itself. It's ambiguous. If someone stops by and says GG after beating us in Silly Comp Sunday, it may well have happened because we were required to play using only our sub-weapons or something. It may have been a hilarious train wreck of a game because we were required to use a weapon that we don't know how to use well. But that doesn't stop some people from squid bagging us and rubbing it in. So, in this context, if all I have to work with is GG, I'd like to believe that it's positive, and that someone's telling me that they had fun playing with us, but I know there are at least some people who don't mean it that way, and the fact that I can't tell the difference is uncomfortable if that's all they're giving me to work with. So this is a situation where showing the goodwill that manners are intended to support would dictate that someone should be more mindful of their timing and their wording of this kind of communication than just saying GG immediately. Hitzel's recommendation, "Hey, we played earlier today and it was dope getting to play with you," solves this problem, so I'd call that better manners. There are just a few bad apples. Why are you letting them change the way everyone has to communicate with each other, you might say. To which I would respond, yes, there are a few bad apples, and if you let the bad apples go unaddressed, suddenly there are more of them, and there are people around them who look like them who will unintentionally hide them. Anyone who makes this argument has never been a teacher. If you let the sweetest, most harmless little child get away with whispering to their friend in the back of the classroom, that's not a problem for you at all, yet. It's very quiet, It's a student who's very respectful to you most of the time. In a vacuum, this is a non-issue. But we're not in a vacuum. What you're signaling to everyone by letting that one student whisper is either that you're playing favorites, in which case the other students will act out because your classroom is unfair, or the other students will figure that they can also whisper to their friend. As soon as you've got around 3 whisper conversations going on, it becomes significantly more difficult to focus, and you have to start spending time in class getting everyone's attention back instead of teaching. The more that goes unchecked, the worse the problem gets. I found this out the hard way in my first year of teaching, and I'm not exaggerating when I say it was the worst year of my entire life. You know what the bad apples really, really love? Plausible deniability. They love it when they can express something people wouldn't like to hear in a way they can claim was really meant to mean something else. I was just saying GG, lol, why are you getting so mad? You can't prove that they were bragging about winning. Their tone is impossible to determine from nothing but 2 letters typed in chat. Maybe it was meant to be positive, and they just didn't know how it would be interpreted at the time. But if they were more clear, if they used Hitzel's wording, they could make it more unambiguously positive, and they could say it in a way that's more respectful of the player's processing of the loss. Instead of constantly putting yourself in a position where you can be misunderstood as exhibiting a negative behavior, why not make it clear to everyone you have good intentions? It's not reasonable to expect me to just take everyone at their word blindly, when there definitely are some people who will interact with me negatively, and the way you're interacting with me is exactly the language that they're using, and you're a stranger I have no context with. The bad apples will take advantage of that if I let them have it. Incidentally, when you see something like, I was just saying GG, lol, why are you getting so mad? Recognize that this is probably not a person who actually feels positively toward you, because someone who feels positively toward you isn't going to LOL about making you genuinely upset. The reason I really felt this was important enough to address in a video is that this rhetoric is a tactic that's used in much more harmful ways than just bragging about beating a Splatoon streamer. Again, like I said, the GG situation is really minor. But the few bad apples logic someone responded to it with is dangerous when applied to other situations, like, for example, online harassment. During the harassment campaigns of Gamergate, Gamergaters were given the argument to latch onto that there were issues of ethics in game journalism at stake. There definitely is a lot to question about the role of game journalists in the industry. I always felt a little suspicious about how Nintendo Power reviewers were always so positive about mainline Nintendo releases, even when I didn't enjoy them as much. It seemed plausible to some people then, when the claim was made that a woman had gotten with a reviewer romantically for a good review of her game. That claim, though, was pretty well proven incorrect. Under the hood, the campaign was really just a harassment campaign targeting figures because they were viewed as feminist. But because people had this idea that it was about a breach of ethics, that gave them an excuse to be angry and oppose the feminists, and still feel like they weren't a bad person for doing it. They weren't the bad apples. They just mistakenly believed that what they were campaigning for was ethics in games journalism, and so they became a Trojan horse for those bad apples. It was a movement which was designed all along by the bad apples to accomplish the goals of the bad apples, but because they gave people who wouldn't go all the way an excuse to associate with it, it amplified the power of the bad apples. There were people there who looked suspiciously like the bad apples, but that you couldn't just accuse on sight because most of them weren't sending death threats. You can't just accuse someone of sending death threats if they haven't sent death threats. Never mind that they're associating with a movement in which a lot of participants are sending pretty specific death threats. So be really careful with that few bad apples reasoning. It can be used to camouflage really awful, harmful people if you let it. That can let bad situations get really dark before they get addressed. Finally, we get to another phrase of bad apples and those who camouflage them. Just grow thicker skin. It's not like I don't understand that people are going to hit me with a smug GG in chat from time to time. It's not that I can't take it. It's not like I'm just going to melt into a puddle in agony if this goes on for too much longer. It's an annoyance, at the absolute worst. I'm going to keep putting up with it. Plenty of people put up with far worse all the time and still live happy, healthy existences. If you think thicker skin is a solution, though, a cure to the problem, you're not understanding why I made yesterday's video at all. People don't set boundaries, like I set yesterday, with people they don't like or don't want to be in contact with. They set boundaries so that other people know how to treat them, to make them comfortable, to make it so they enjoy being around you instead of enduring you, like we talked about. I made the video about posting GG in stream chat because I understand that not everyone will have the experiences that I have of being a content creator who's large enough not to know everyone who watches me. It's totally reasonable for people to make an honest mistake and do something that's grating to me when they're meaning to interact with me positively. That's why I'm saying something about it. I did so to inform them about how that actually makes streamers feel, so they are equipped to make them feel better. That's why this communication happened in the first place. Sure, if we're going to get along with each other, we have to have a certain tolerance for not being treated exactly perfectly. We have to see people's intentions through their mistakes, and be willing to forgive when someone makes a minor misstep. That doesn't mean it's my job to like when someone does something that bothers me, though. If something someone says makes me feel stress, that's something I can manage, something I can prevent myself consciously from acting on, but it's not something I can train myself to enjoy, something that will ever do anything other than worsen my mood, even to the slightest degree. It's something I will need to decompress from at some point. What can stop that stress reaction is someone treating me the way I'd like to be treated in the first place. I have to tolerate a certain amount of annoyance and stress to be in a larger society, but I don't want to have to tolerate someone that I'm hanging out with. I want to be able to enjoy being with them. Setting boundaries is the way that happens. "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me" is a phrase I got in a couple places in the comments, and it's just being terribly misused in this context. That sort of thinking is a strategy to help an individual, typically a child who's not used to how mean people are in the real world, endure someone who's being mean to them. Again, endure, not enjoy the company of. I've told y'all, the endurance is not the problem with the GG thing. Streamers can and do endure it. They just don't want to have to endure their stream chat. They want to enjoy it. Used in any other context, the sticks and stones saying is totally untrue. If a commanding officer orders his troops to beat you up, yeah, I guess the words aren't what's hurting you directly, but they definitely still caused it to happen. With slurs, there's always an implicit threat of violence. At the very least, the idea that the person using the slur would like to hurt their target. Words are used to harass and abuse. Even outside of saying something evil, words are how we communicate we're breaking up with someone or ask for a divorce. If I were to start cursing angrily at you right now in this video, it would probably cause a physiological response, elevating your heart rate and whatnot. It would have an effect on your body, just from me saying words. I would probably be able to make a child cry with how scary I was acting. Words will never hurt me? I disagree. If it's really such a problem for someone to recognize that some people have different perspectives and make a reasonable effort to adjust their treatment of them according to how it'll be perceived, that person doesn't actually care about them that much. They care a lot more about not having to change their behavior, about not having to go to any emotional effort for the sake of strengthening their relationships, about not having to think too hard. If you're not informed about what someone wants and you do something that bothers them by mistake, that's understandable. If you do know what they want, and you just decide, too much to think about, now they're less inclined to make the same effort for you. They're not going to be as forgiving toward you. They're not going to care as much about treating you with good manners. They're not going to put effort toward you if you're not going to reciprocate it for them. That's always going to lead to a weaker relationship that's more likely to become hostile, that's more likely to stress you out, that's more likely to be something you're enduring instead of enjoying. This lack of willingness to be empathetic is more than just an aspect of your personal life. If it's leading you to disregard the experiences of others, to force other people to conform to your standards instead of ever deciding to conform to theirs, sure, it's going to be harder for you to make friends, but that's not the worst outcome. If it's leading you to disregard others' experiences in spite of evidence, even scientific findings that the accounts of their experiences are correct, now your rudeness has become a dangerous kind of willful ignorance. You need to investigate this in yourself for more than just your participation in the Splatoon community. This is something that really awful people can use to amplify hatred outside of the core of people who are generating the hate. Sensitivity is not weakness. Sensitivity is emotional intelligence, an ability to see what's really going on in the room, an awareness of less obvious sources of information. Sensitive people can still have thick skin, and in fact they often don't even need it because they can see where others are coming from when they unknowingly commit a faux pas. They can quickly swap between different sets of social customs to find the right vocabulary for communicating what they want to get across and understanding what's being communicated back to them. When someone with the superpower that is sensitivity sees content creators describing why something bothers them and sees it backed up by a lot of others like them, they don't push back and say, "Nah, you should just accept the way I say things is good, because I think of myself as a good person, and I don't want to have to think of myself as having done something that's not good, because that would mean I'm not a good person." They think, okay, so when I'm in this context, I'll get along with people better by behaving a little differently. Let's remember that for next time. I'll see all of you next time.